Welcome today to the American Geographical Society's symposium, Geography 2050, The Future of the World Ocean. The AGS, as it's called, was founded in 1851 and is the oldest geographical society in America and one of the oldest in the world. But we're focusing the whole symposium on the future of the ocean. And I'll first introduce myself, Lawson Brigham from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I'm also at the Wilson Center in DC. But maybe more relevant to this conversation today is as a U.S. Coast Guard officer, spending a lot of time at sea for about 29 years. So I hope it's relevant. Our conversation today is with Ian Urbina, who is director of the his project, which is the name of the book, The Outlaw Ocean. I like the subtitle in this book as well, Journeys Across, and the keywords are the last untamed frontier, which is very appropriate. People think of outer space, they think of the Arctic or the Antarctic, but perhaps more relevant is the ocean today, the untamed frontier, as Ian calls it. The book is about a 4 or 5 year odyssey, as I would say, of Ian's travels around the world's oceans, thousands of interviews. What I think is interesting about the book, besides it's a large book, maybe 500 pages, but 400 pages are narrative, gripping narrative, and there's also 100 pages of very insightful notes and reflections of Ian's work. So I think that's very relevant too in our discussion and useful. Ian, besides being project director of this Outlaw Ocean project, he's an investigative reporter for the New York Times, where I think he's worked for 20 years. He's has been awarded the Pulitzer Prize. He's a graduate of Georgetown University and the University of Chicago, two preeminent universities in America. Also a Fulbright Fellow in Cuba. Written many, many articles, of course, features in the New York Times, but articles in prominent media outlets. And we're very honored to have you, Ian, today with us. And thank you for participating in a subject that's directly related to the symposium and directly related to your work. First, as we introduce this topic, we're using one of Ian's videos, and we'll play that for 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll begin our conversation with Ian.
I think of the ocean as this space that has been kind of a metaphor for freedom, and it still is that. You know, it is a place that people go to escape rules and escape government and escape other people because it's so expansive. But those very allures of the space are what has made the ocean a scary place.
Don't take photos. Don't take photos. So I put the camera
down. Few places on the planet are as lawless as the high seas. The ocean is a place of amazing beauty, but it's also this dystopian realm where severe inhumanities occur, and often with impunity.
Over.
What you realize when you're in that void or in that expanse is that most of that space is ungoverned and ungovernable. there are few laws, and what laws exist are murky and overlapping and contradictory. Laws are only as good as their enforcement, and the enforcement mechanisms for any of the laws are anemic at best. You have human trafficking, sea slavery, abuse of stowaways, weapons trafficking. When the UN looked at it in 2009 and they interviewed Cambodian deckhands, over 50% of them had witnessed murder. A lot of the forced labor that end up on these fishing boats are trafficked migrants and are very poor and easily taken advantage of. One mariner summed it up as, this line of work is like jail with a salary, except the salary is not guaranteed. We in the West would like to think that things are progressively getting better, and in many ways they are, but in this space, things are arguably getting worse. Over 99% of crimes that occur out there go unreported. And there's not a huge point in reporting them because it's never clear who would actually do anything with that information. I think if there's anything to be learned about human nature from the Outlaw Ocean, it's that we all have this visceral capacity to behave in ways that we thought civilization had stamped out. There's a vanishingly thin line between civilization and the lack of it. And I think the exploration of this frontier is an attempt to look at how thin that line is and what's on the other side.
Yeah, after that powerful introduction of this book that was published in 2019, but of course the features came out in the New York Times roughly around 2015, and all of this work was prior to 2015. What I'm interested in first is, of course, kind of an easy question of what motivated you, Ian, to dive into this complex subject.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And secondly, the various forces pushed me to the topic. One was just the pure journalistic instinct of, especially as an investigative reporter, your mandate is to find novel topics, ideally virgin snow, which is to say, either old topics that you've discovered a new way into them, or things that were previously not known. And then ideally, you're searching for, as an investigative reporter, things that deserve to be fixed, things that are wrong. And it's not sort of voyeuristic entertainment. It's really things that need correcting. And so the sea writ large was a place I had been interested in since grad school. I was an anthropologist, and I kind of procrastinated on my dissertation and fled into a job for a while on a ship, and that was my first exposure to seafarers in general. And I knew from that exposure that this realm and this workforce, the 50 million people that work out there, was robust and colorful and woefully underreported. The public awareness of what happens out there tended to be framed by Hollywood. And when you thought specifically of maritime crime, most often people would think of Somali piracy or, say, the BP spill. And my thought was it would be a service to the public to expand that spectrum of understanding and sort of tell stories about all the other myriad activities that occur out there, many of them bad.
Yeah, thank you. I further related to this issue is the complexity and the breadth of the issues. That's what I took out of the book, that there are interrelated issues. It's a very broad set of challenges in the ocean. So could you comment about that complexity and maybe the interconnectedness of these related ocean issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, in the realm of journalism, the approach to covering the ocean has generally tended to be as an environmental topic, right? It's been focused on the marine life, and for obvious reasons, good reasons. But one of the things my editor and I wanted to do differently was to look at the concerns that exist above the waterline, not below them, and focus considerably on the people out there. Which is not to say we were not concerned about the environmental stories as well, but we thought the entrance into the space and the topic would best be focused on the human rights and labor concerns out there, and then secondarily backing our way into the environmental concerns. The intersectionality of human rights, labor, and environmental crimes is, as you say, complex and riveting. And sort of figuring out, for example, how the problem of overfishing, the problem of climate change as it plays out offshore, the problem of illegal fishing intersect with the problem of sea slavery, i.e., the use of captive debt bonded forced labor. There is a relationship there, and one drives the other and back again. But really figuring out how to explain that and chronicle it was one of the ambitions of the reporting. And then just sort of on a larger level to the question you had, the other meta, if you think of those issues as infrastructure, the other meta structure thought on the wow, this is a complicated place topic is this is a huge sprawling realm, 2/3 of the planet, for which there are quite a few rules, as you, as a former Coast Guard guy, know. But enforcement of those rules is really lacking, and quite especially on the high seas, because that space, is not clearly under any single nation's jurisdiction, and as such, there's this sort of void of authority and enforcement, and that is a major reason that um, so much happens out there, and why it's so rarely confronted or corrected or investigated or prosecuted.
Yeah, I think that the complexity, well, in this complexity, what's your appraisal in this book on essentially what might be the most serious issue facing the ocean? I'll set aside climate change for all of humanity, but from all of the issues you dealt with, what do you think is the most serious one? It maybe there are multiple serious issues.
Mm. I mean, to switch metaphorically and think of this as a hydra, and the hydra has many heads, and in this case, topically, the many heads of this are um, the variety of um, misbehavior and abuse, right? So it's, as you work down towards the body of the hydra, let's first talk about the heads. You've got sea slavery, you've got intentional dumping of oil, you have arms trafficking, you have illegal and overfishing, you have illegal whaling, you have repo men who are paid by banks and others, insurers and wealthy ship owners, to go steal ships. You have murder of stowaways and abuse of stowaways. You have migrant, traffickers. Um, so, needless to say, you have a wide variety of heads on this hydra. If the thing is activity at sea that needs to be policed, the body of the hydra of the problem, to me, is summed up as on the conceptual level, um, a lack of governance, and more specifically, um, a murkiness of jurisdiction, and quite essentially a lack of monitoring, right? So crimes are only countered as much as they're counted. And if you have a space and a mode of commerce and a bunch of players, ships, ship owners, crew, who are operating largely in the dark, without really clear methods of tracking where they're going, what they're doing, who's on board, what they're carrying, all those things that, for example, in the aeronautics industry, especially post 9/11, a whole different world, right? You approach a airline pilot and say, in any country, and say, hey, you've submitted your crew manifest, your cargo, your departure plan, your arrival plan. You're going to keep your transponder on during transit, et cetera, et cetera. And the pilot of that plane, big or small, is likely to say, yeah, of course. Go to a ship captain, especially a long haul fishing captain, who mostly works on the high seas, and you ask those same sorts of questions, and you'll get a very different reaction. So to answer your question, I think the lack of tracking and transparency, and the culture that has surrounded and made that normal, is probably the core problem that gives rise to the many heads that I just mentioned, to the Hydra.
Yeah, I like the metaphor with the Hydra. Of course, central to all of the use of the oceans is global economics. When you think of shipping, moving energy across the world's oceans with tankers and LNG carriers, uh, shipping itself, container shipping, and fishing is a huge economic uh, uh, issue as well. So, no, I appreciate the using that metaphor to try to describe the collection of issues and how they relate. What having read the book, in your chapter 10, I would say maybe is the most shocking issue. But for you, what was the most shocking thing that you've seen in all of these travels
Mm.
around the oceans?
I mean, honestly, it's hard to, sort of a Sophie's choice, right? You don't want to choose any one of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Sure.
I do think there was this one chapter about murder at sea, and it was surrounding this individual case of a sort of slow motion slaughter that occurred on the Indian Ocean, that was filmed on a cell phone camera, and that camera was subsequently found in a back of a taxi in Fiji. Made its way to Interpol, and that's when I was tipped off. And we began this investigation trying to figure out, who are the guys in the water. At least five, possibly upwards of 10 men are killed in the video. They're picked off by semi-automatic weapons, maybe two. They're surrounded by Taiwanese tuna longliners, and at the end, the at least witnesses and maybe participants, but guys on board where the shots were fired, pose for celebratory selfies. Now, if this had happened in a factory in the mountains of Guatemala, and this footage had come out, you better bet that a government, if not multiple governments, would have sprung into action. This video was circulating on the dark web for a while. I got it. We spent a year investigating it, dispatched, folks to Taiwan, to Fiji. We put it on the front page of the Times, and even then, we couldn't get the relevant parties, Taiwanese government, Fijian government, some others, Seychelles, to really take it seriously and engage. It's pretty timely because today on the front page of the Washington Post, we have a story. I have a story that I produced and ran, and it's about that very case and the arrest of the captain, or the accused the captain, that we cited in the reporting and in the book, was finally arrested. It's 2020. This shooting happened in 2012. So
Hmm.
and it was only after a serious campaign of shaming, that the Taiwanese government decided to sort of drag its feet and put out an arrest warrant in 2018, 3 years after we put it on the front page. So it is, in some ways, a good news story, kind of, that the arrest finally occurred, but a kind of illustrative story in the sense that crimes at sea of this sort, even unbelievably well documented ones, rarely get taken seriously.
Yeah, I thought that one phrase in one of your from one of your interviewees was life at sea is cheap and perhaps expendable
Hmm.
for these crew members. I thought that was very profound. That life at sea is cheap. I can't remember exactly who you interviewed, but that was quite powerful to me. um, relating to all of the mariners out there.
Mhm.
Yeah, you mentioned the 50 million mariners, maybe about 2 million aboard large commercial ships, but perhaps another half million on the cruise ships.
Mhm.
So it's quite a large group of people that work at sea, and they may be underreported. There may be more, from my knowledge. Yeah, on a more positive note, a more positive story, you went to the bottom of the sea in a submersible. Could you tell us a little bit about that adventure?
Yeah, so I went twice, and once was off the coast of Brazil to tell a story about these Brazilian scientists who were worried about the fact that their government had given permission to some large oil companies um, to drill near the mouth of in the ocean, but near the mouth of the Atlantic of the Amazon, excuse me, and also perilously close to this very unusual coral wall. You know that um, was fairly fragile and taken quite a long time to grow to its size, and so we went on a submersible there, and that in some ways was a story about the fights between various stakeholders. You know, on the one hand, the extraction, oil and gas extraction industry that are looking to tap new resources, and on the other hand, in this case, the Brazilian scientists who um, thought that there was very little oversight given in that drilling effort, and it had real risks that the government hadn't taken into account. So they put a submersible in the water to go down there and document the existence of certain species that previously were not known or that are known and needed to be protected. And it was all part of a campaign to block the drilling plan. And ultimately, for at least a while, it proved successful. They got footage, they documented new species, and they gummed up the process um, for drilling. But then the new, administration came in, Bolsonaro, who's very pro drilling, and those permits were renewed, and so the fight continues. And as in many of the stories in the book, these are the war is ongoing. The battles are distinct and winnable, but the war probably is this fight that's going to always be happening in one form or another in multiple chapters.
Yeah, it'd be interesting how that plays out because drilling on the continental shelf for oil and gas, I mean, through the century will be changing for sure. It's expensive, and it might not be able to compete with terrestrial drilling, uh, with mitigation measures and climate change. So it's very interesting that there could be plausibly a retreat from the ocean due to climate change, but indirectly.
Right.
So it'd be interesting to see. But yeah, I thought that was in your book an interesting story and how you got into it by actually going to the bottom of the sea in the submersible.
Mm.
The next issue is kind of spread throughout the book, and it's a technical one that you learned about and I know about, which is this flag of convenience issue for merchant ships for most vessels in the world, and it's where owners in one country will register their ship in another country, and of course the key thing is here is that most of the countries that the owners register in are developing countries. What are your thoughts about this kind of global issue?
Yeah. So flags of convenience made a lot of sense. Make a lot of sense from the perspective of a ship owner, who is trying to lessen the cost of running their operation and also mitigate or limit the headache of red tape and bureaucracy, right? So um, when historically, if you were going, well, first of all, to take one step back, when you're on the high seas and you're on a vessel, the laws that apply on that vessel are largely dictated by the flag you're flying, right? So if you're on a ship and in international waters, and you're crewed by South Koreans and deckhanded by Indonesians, and the ship owner is a Taiwanese, and the tuna you're pulling is headed for the UK. None of that matters. Well, with regard to the laws that apply, if you're flying the flag of Seychelles or the flag of Bolivia or Mongolia, landlocked country, all flag
And
countries, right?
sure.
So as an owner of that ship who's trying to kind of mitigate the headache of dealing with nosy inspectors and not have to answer questions by lawyers or journalists when things go awry, or control the cost of having to visit port every 3 months rather than every 3 years or what have you, you're going to choose probably the cheapest, easiest flag, and that's historically the ship crew and owner would dock in the country and they'd fly the flag of that country. Flags of convenience emerged as the alternative, and now these are, the two largest flags of convenience are Panama and Liberia. Liberia is run. I'm in Washington D.C. Liberia's the flag registry is run in Virginia. It's an office, with people.
Yeah,
So
like the Marshall Islands is also run
right.
in Virginia.
That's right, and that's a very popular one as well. And so these are businesses, and typically they're staffed by people that are largely um, uh, interested in making the business of providing this permit. I want to be careful on my wording here, as efficient and easy as possible. These are not people who, when things go awry, are trained in labor law, have interest or time or training in human rights issues, feel any obligation to answer questions from police or reporters. That's not these people. These people are running a business where they're paid by the people whose ship it is to provide the flag, and those are their clients, and that's whose privacy they protect. And that is the fundamental flaw and conflict of interest in the way that this industry is set up when it comes to a deckhand from the Philippines who disappears at sea and his family wants to figure out what happened, or someone who has their arm lopped off by a machine on board, or someone gets raped or what have you. The first place you're told to go is to the flag of convenience, and that's a dead end.
Yeah, it certainly is a business strategy for global shipping, and it putting it in the lap of the developing countries where they have no capacity or very little capacity for law enforcement, or maybe even care about the law enforcement element. It's the business and the revenue generation. So it is a huge global issue when it comes to the enforcement and the application of enforcement on all of the issues that you address in the book.
I would throw in one thing, even if these were in UK or the US, it's less, in my view, the developing country element. It's more the fact that you've taken what should be a public entity that has to respond to laws and lawmakers and investors, and you've put it in the private industry realm. So it could be a American company. They probably would be equally, maybe even more effective at not responding to questions because they're allowed to, because they're in the private sector. And that's in my view, the bigger problem of flags of convenience. Then, granted, this problem becomes even worse when the flag of convenience is in Mongolia or Bolivia, where they're not even going to answer the phone. But even if it was a U.S. company, they'd answer the phone, but they'd just be much more articulate at telling you to take a hike.
Yeah, maybe, but I think at least in the United States, if it dealt with a shipping issue or marine safety, environmental protection issue, I would hope that my old organization, the U.S. Coast Guard, would be quickly on it to investigate, as imperfect as the system is.
Mm-hmm.
But do, Ian, do you have any other? I mean, there are lots of issues that we could talk for a day, of course. But any other major points you would like to make before we sum up?
No, I mean,
Any particular
this is
plea or issue?
it's, I mean, it's a self-serving point, but I would just say that, and I don't need to convince you, but I do think one of the fundamental challenges of and the lack of governance of this space is the out of sight, out of mind nature of it, and that is worsened by the lack of journalism that occurs out there because it's expensive and time consuming. And I would just say that the book was the beginning of a nonprofit, the Outlaw Ocean Project, which is a journalistic entity, and we produce stories every month. And today was the front page of the Washington Post, and next month is the New Yorker. Last month was NBC News. But there is a hunger for these sorts of stories because they're just rare and often quite urgent. But I do think the journalism plays an important role. There's a real need for ongoing coverage, just even to show, you as Coast Guard folk know this, but the rest of the public generally doesn't, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, most Americans don't understand, I think, the connection of America to the world's oceans and everything we do. Certainly trade, but security. And all of these issues do impact Americans. I think the coverage is very important. Probably helps new initiatives at the UN with the High Seas Convention.
Hmm.
Very technical, very narrow issue, but most people would understand that it is necessary to have some convention and legal mechanisms to tackle issues that are in the unregulated zone, which is the high seas. So we may see some more positive future, but I personally think that the future of the oceans probably will be dominated by climate change,
Hmm.
acidification, warming waters,
Hmm.
fewer fish,
Hmm.
etc. With all of these issues still prevalent that you deal with in the book.
Yeah, I agree. And plastic pollution, if we want to add to the list.
I mean, they had the plastics as
Hmm.
who would guess that plastics are and microplastics are in the Arctic Ocean or down in the Southern Ocean, but they're pervasive around the total ocean. Good topic for you to cover, maybe even Arctic issues in the future, what
Yeah,
I deal with.
yeah.
Well, thanks very much, Ian, for your valuable time and your contribution to our symposium on the future of the global ocean. All the viewers can order Ian's book,
Mm.
The Outlaw Ocean, on the website of the AGS. So we thank you all for joining us, and thank you very much, Ian, for a great conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.